Let's take a closer look at factoring, specifically factoring by using the greatest common factor. If we recall the distributive property, it tells us that we can take this monomial multiplied by a binomial and distribute it to each term in the binomial. This then leaves us with a simplified form of 18x cubed minus 3x squared. However, we consider 3x squared times the quantity 6x minus 1 to be the factored form. And that's what we'll be working on, is always looking now for the factored form of a polynomial. So the greatest common factor, specifically when we're looking at two numbers, is the largest whole number that divides evenly into both of those numbers. So if we look at 42 and 56, we can write it out in its prime factorization. 42 is 2 times 3 times 7, and 56 is 2 times 2 times 2 times 7. What's in common? Well, both have a multiple of 2, and both have a multiple of 7. So 2 times 7, or 14, is the greatest common factor. For polynomials, the greatest common factor is the largest monomial factor of each of the terms in the polynomial. So let's say we had a list here of 3 terms. What is the greatest common factor? Well, first let's look at the greatest common factor of 8, 12, and 16. And I can see that 8 goes into 16, but 8 does not go into 12 evenly. But I can tell that that greatest common factor there is 4. I now have an x squared, an x, and an x squared. Well, I'm looking for the largest monomial that goes into each of the polynomials. I can't take an x squared out of each of these because in our second term, I have only one x. So x squared does not multiply into that. Therefore, the GCF is just x. And then, looking at the next terms, I have y squared, and y cubed. Again, the largest monomial term that could multiply into each of these then just includes a y. So 4xy is the greatest common factor for these set of terms. So in factoring using the greatest common factor, what we do is first factor out that greatest common factor, and then recognize that what is left is part of the factored form. So 8y to the fourth minus 12y cubed plus 4y squared. The greatest common factor is 4y squared. That is the largest monomial term that can multiply into each of those 3 terms. So if I factor out a 4y squared, I will be left with 3 terms, and I have to figure out what those 3 terms are. Well, 4y squared times 2y squared would give me 8y to the fourth. What I'm looking at is I have 8y to the fourth. I'm essentially dividing or factoring out that 4y squared. So 8 divided by 4 is 2. Y to the fourth divided by y squared, remember when you divide you subtract, is y squared. So that is what is left inside of my polynomial. Using that same logic, if I'm factoring out a 4y squared from negative 12y cubed, I'm left with a negative 3y. And if I'm factoring 4y squared out of 4y squared, I am left with 1. Now, I must write that 1. It's very critical because I have 3 terms initially in this polynomial. In checking my answer, I can use that distributive property. 4y squared times 2y squared is 8y to the fourth. 4y squared times a negative 3y is a negative 12y cubed. And 4y squared times 1 is plus 4y squared.